Okay, hi everybody. This is a mini lecture, and it's the first time that I've ever done something like this, but this is an unprecedented time. So I'm going to go for it. As you've probably read in my email, I'm not in the UAE. Johnny and I made the decision to leave on March 6th, actually, when I feared that things might get a lot worse and I just need to be near my family at this time, and was planning on coming back here for spring break. And so we just were super proactive and jumped on a plane at that point. For all you seniors, I really feel for you, and I'm really sorry about the disruption of your glorious senior year. And all I can say is that I'll just do everything I can to make our class as enriching as possible, but also not stressful. I don't want you to be stressed out about our class. Okay, there's some other things on the email that I sent to you. I've shown you some pictures of my workspace, and I've also sent you an 8-week plan for Fiber Studio, including due dates, and I've shown you where I've posted that in my workspace, and I encourage you to do the same so you can really stay organized. If you ever have questions about anything, of course, email me. If you miss a due date because you have a million things swirling around in virtual space, please don't be concerned, just communicate with me. Okay, so today I want to talk to you about, and I'm really just going to try to do this in 5 minutes if that's possible. I want to talk to you about the Victoria Mitchell essay in your textiles reader. So if you want to get your book out and follow along with this lecture, mini lesson. This essay, Textiles, Text, and Technique, has been very important to me. It's really helped me to understand alternatives to traditional and hegemonic notions of the way knowledge is made. I firmly believe, and taking my cues from Mitchell here, that thinking through textile work, thinking through what it is to make with the hands, opens up possibilities for sense making and knowledge production in ways that are repressed, suppressed, and undervalued for the most part, especially if we were to say in the West, or institutions like ours, the university, that's definitely based on a kind of a Western hegemonic, almost addiction to logos, to the word, and to certain what Mitchell calls architectonic frameworks for cognition. Putting cognition that has a close relationship with words against or opposed to something like intuition, which is often associated with nature and with another sense outside of words and outside of the eyes. So Mitchell's whole essay sort of gives us this idea that if we pay attention to textile practices, we actually have an invitation to disrupt this binary between cognition and intuition, this binary between culture and nature. And that's been very, very important to me. If we entertain this kind of thinking seriously, we actually do put ourselves in a bit of a subversive position, especially vis-a-vis, I would say, most university classes, structures of knowledge and power. But it's important to remember that the kind of thing that Mitchell is talking about, maybe she's even advocating for textility, for paying attention to the way senses other than the eye, the work of the hand, the feeling of the skin, making something is a kind of knowledge. We have to remember that this kind of work and knowledge will always be present, will always continue. So sort of no matter where you are and what institution or what framework you're working in, look beneath the surface, beneath what's immediately apparent, and you'll find there perhaps these other ways of knowing, these other modes of knowledge production. Okay, so let's take a little tour through her text, because that's just my kind of synopsis or telling you why I love this text. But let's go to the text itself. So page 6, she does a really good job of laying out what she's going to do in this essay. And sort of the bottom of the first column, she says, in this paper, I consider transitions and boundaries between text, textiles, and techne. So she's really laying out for you the relationship actually between text, textile, and technique. And she's doing that not to say that writing derives from textile work, but that our very idea of making, we have to remember that writing, systems of writing are made, they're constructed, they're not natural. So I think that that's the important point there that she's trying to make. Let me see if there's some other things that I can point out to you on page 6. Oh, okay, bottom of the second column. Very, very bottom. The textility of making suggests a practice which informs thought. Unlike an architectonic framework for cognition, the textility of making, provides evidence of a more supple fabrication. So here she's kind of introducing that perhaps cognition, which is very much rooted in words and logos and systems of writing, has a much more rigid framework. That if we think about the textility of making, we open up doors for kind of a supple way of thinking. I'm thinking now of also the soft logics in the Penina Barnett essay. I think that Mitchell and Barnett here are in conversation very much. Okay, everybody with me? Okay, let's continue through the text. I love on page 7 when she talks about the synapses in the body and that kind of like biology stuff, and the bottom of the first column, page 7. In the fibrous tissue of the sensory body, both the gestures of action and the utterance of speech are finely connected. So, lest we think that speech is related to words or logos, she reminds us that actually speech is part of the sensory body, which then I think leads her to make this claim on page 7, second column. Do you see that kind of quote from this guy, woman, I don't know who, J.J. Gibson? Language is always realized in some physical medium, okay? That it's not, language is not disconnected from the body if we remember that language is tied to speech. So anyway, that's been an important idea for me. Then on page 7, we go further to say that there's been this privileging of ocular centrism. So sight has been a privileged sense, definitely in the West. And when we say the West, I think we can all say, probably since we're all at university, that regardless of where we're from geographically, we have some of the West inside us. So that's just kind of an important thing to remember. So this page 7 points out that touch as a sense has often been suppressed. And we're in a way kind of alienated from the idea that we make sense, we make knowledge of the world through touch. So again, Mitchell is making this essay to say, let's claim that, and textility can help us do that. Going on to page 8, here's a nice discussion on the first column of the historical development of writing. If you look at the middle of that column, first column, historically, the development of writing coincides with a shift away from the locus of making. I think that's really, really important. I think we tend to privilege the development of writing as some sort of advancement in culture. I am here to tell you that is not the case. if it were the case that writing meant that we advanced, then you would have a very hard time explaining contemporary genocide, for example. Why is it that we can claim that there's this advancement in the written word and the notion of written down law and human rights, but yet there are still these atrocities? So on many fronts, we can say that the development of writing, it was a tool. It has given us some certain things, but Mitchell points out that it has also taken some things away. So there she really establishes that logos has become the primary way that ideas are exchanged. And she's asserting it need not be the case, and it isn't the case everywhere, and we can do a lot of work to sort of suppress that logos and in a way think through textility. Let me see. Annie Albers is discussed then, as you've read. She's an amazing person to think through and think with on textiles, but I'll just leave her for now. And I'll just point out on page 9, first column, Mitchell points out that we have a limitation. Mitchell's discussing Albers. Albers claims that if we get too reliant on words, that we actually fall prey to intellectualization, one-sidedness, incompleteness. And she's sort of saying that layer after layer of civilized life seems to have veiled our directness of seeing. So I think it's a really, really strong claim. Let me see what else. Let's just fast forward to toward the end of the essay, page 11. Yeah, I think here's a very nice discussion, page 11, the first column, where Mitchell traces this word back further, textile, text, techne, and goes even further back to Sanskrit. Takman meaning child, taksh, to make, the Indo-European root tek, used of men meaning to beget and of women to bring forth. So even there we see that the root of this word goes further than back than text and craftsmanship, but it actually is like the foundation of making. So let's remember that. I think it's really interesting. There's a lot of other things to say. Page 11, second column, the myth of Arachne and Athena is discussed here, and later in our semester, in our 8 weeks, we're going to revisit that through a really great essay by Sarat Maharaj. So I'll leave that alone at this moment. But I think what's really important on page 11, bottom of the second column, is that, look at this sentence. I love this sentence. The subtle nuance and fragile pliability of textiles as embodied metaphor have contributed actively to the disruption of the authority of language. And I think that that's a very, very important and lovely point. We can celebrate writing. I mean, I'm a writer. I love writing. It's not that we want to vilify writing and text, but I think it's very, very useful to remember that knowledge is produced in a myriad of ways, and a real wide-angle view of knowledge making would include the textility of making, that sense is made through more senses than just sight and not through a reliance on cognition. So, especially for those of you who aren't visual artists or that's not your major, I'm really curious about how you read this and what impact it might have for your capstones, for your fields. I'm thinking of Natasha, your work with cognition and directionality and reading. I don't know, I'm just really curious to see your thoughts about it, and I'll start an email forum, a forum in classes, so that you can weigh in and maybe pull out questions from Mitchell or things you agree with or things that give you pause. So I'm looking forward to that online discussion. Okay, that concludes this mini lecture, and thanks very much for tuning in. And yeah, we'll see you again online in many forms. Okay, bye.